The Green Bay Packers finished the 2023 season with a 9-8 record and made the playoffs for the fourth time in 5 years. It was a very unexpected playoff appearance, especially after they started the year with a 2-5 record. The Packers were expected to have a rebuilding year and were expected to have a down year, and 2024 was supposed to be a year where they dip their toes in the playoffs and really make a championship push in 2025. But after a 23-19 loss in Week 10 to the Steelers, which set them back to 3-6, the Packers finished the year on a 6-2 run, which included wins over the Lions and Chiefs and their favorite opponent, the Bears, in Week 18 to secure the number 7 seed. They would go on to dismantle the Cowboys in the wildcard round with a score of 48-32, and even a 16-point win looks watered down compared to how that game was actually played, before losing to the 49ers in the divisional round. A divisional round loss for most teams is a pretty good year, but when you consider where the Packers were at times throughout the 2023 season, and when you factor in Jordan Love threw 18 touchdowns to just 1 interception down the stretch of the 23 season, along with the fact their offense is incredibly young, well, the Green Bay Packers are dangerous entering this year. But how far can they actually go? Well, we're going to break everything down in today's video. Now let's begin. And we are starting today's video by breaking down who the Packers lost in free agency and who they acquired. One of their biggest losses in free agency was safety Darnell Savage, who is probably most known for the playoff pick 6 he had against the Cowboys, which spread the game wide open as the Packers increased their lead from 20-0 to 27-0. But aside from that play, Darnell was a hit-or-miss player, and there were games, like the Dallas game, where he would play well, and there were other games where he would miss multiple tackles, have lapses in coverage, and at times be a liability. And there was a reason Green Bay was okay with letting him walk, and they more than replaced Darnell by bringing in veteran Xavier McKinney. McKinney, when healthy, is a phenomenal player, and in 2023, he had 110 tackles, 11 pass deflections, and even had 3 interceptions. And contrary to how the draft process has been for the past few years, due to COVID having an impact on guys' eligibility, meaning they could stay in college for another year, which in turn would significantly affect the age of a draft prospect, causing some guys to be 24 going on 25 as a rookie, well, Xavier will play the season at just 25 years old. And with how young the Packers roster is, specifically on offense, I am all for making a big push like this in free agency while you can. And not only that, but Xavier signed a 4-year, $67 million contract, and only 23 of it is guaranteed. So if, for whatever reason, Xavier is a free agent bust, which I do not think he will be, by the way, the Packers are still protected in the long run. Now, former Packers running back Aaron Jones signed with the Vikings this offseason, and Aaron missed 6 games last year, so they had some time to adjust to getting used to life without him already. Not only that, but Aaron will turn 30 in December, so the likelihood he was ever going to sign another contract or even stay in Green Bay for 3 or 4 more years was minimal. And the Packers signing Josh Jacobs to the contract they did was one of my favorite moves they made this offseason because of the terms within the contract. Josh Jacobs signed a 4-year, $48 million contract and is 26 years old and was drafted back in 2019. And I know you may be thinking, well, there is a strong possibility that things could go sideways if Jacobs ages poorly, specifically in years 3 and 4 of the deal. But Jacobs was only guaranteed $12.5 million, and if they can get an 11 or 1,200 yard year from him this year, then the contract alone is worth it. I personally doubt Jacobs plays out the length of this contract, but when you only have the first year and some change guaranteed, go for it. Now, the whole running backs being in their physical prime during the duration of their rookie contracts genuinely stinks for them, and that's an entirely different discussion, but there's not a lot that can be done about that at this particular point in time. But for the sake of the Packers and the outlook for them long term, I loved the additions of both Xavier McKinney and Josh Jacobs. They lost guard John Runyon in free agency to the Giants, and while Runyon was not an elite player by any means, he did start 50 games for them over the past few years, and the continuity along the offensive line is never easy to replace. He will be replaced by 2022 third-round pick Sean Rhyan at the right guard position, and we'll see how that works out. Now, this is a slight concern I have heading into the year with the Packers, is the right guard play, but with how good their offense will be elsewhere, and with how good of an improviser Jordan Love was at times throughout the 2023 season, specifically down the stretch, I think they'll be just fine, and I don't think a right guard with question marks will entirely derail their season. Now, for the 2024 Packers defense, this is a unit Packers fans should be really excited about, and it's not just because of bringing in a big-name free agent like Xavier McKinney. Packers fans had been fed up with former defensive coordinator Joe Barry for, and this is not an exaggeration, years, as in plural. There is a very real chance that had the Panthers somehow, someway beat Green Bay last year in a game they put up 30 points, which was the only time they put up 30 points all year, that the Packers finish 8-9 and the Jordan Love we saw against the Cowboys in the playoffs, and then the ensuing week against the 49ers, minus the final drive, be the player Packers fans are excited about today. And that would have been due in large part to Joe Barry. The Bucs won in the Lambeau last year in what was a very pivotal game for the Packers, as Green Bay had just fell to 6-7 with a loss against the Giants on Monday night, and they lost at home by double digits 6 days later, in a game where Baker Mayfield would go on to have a perfect passer rating. Now, Green Bay won out, and you could say the rest is history as we enter the 2024 season, but I do think the Packers defense should improve really by default entering the year. I am very excited to see the duo of Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness as we enter 2024, and while Rashawn has never been a 14 or 15 sack player, he has been a very good player from a pressure standpoint and how often he affects passing plays, and you can argue that's just as impactful. Lucas Van Ness had 18 pressures on 182 pass rushing snaps last year as a rookie, which is pretty close to a pressure for every 10 snaps, and obviously if that were to translate to 500 pass rushing snaps, then he would have been in line for a 50 pressure season. But I think Lucas will get to the quarterback at an even higher rate this year, and when you have a player who I believe is emerging in Lucas, along with a guy who has already emerged in Rashawn Gary, well, this is quietly a really good pass rushing duo. They also have a really good defensive tackle in Kenny Clark, who was recently extended, and if Kenny plays at the level he has over the past few years, I would like to think this is a Packers Ring of Honor player. And he may be now for that matter, as he is a 3-time Pro Bowler and has been a very, very good player for this team since being drafted back in 2016. Another player that I like in Green Bay's defense is third-year player Devonte Wyatt. The Packers' 2022 season wasn't the best for a few reasons. They, of course, traded Davante Adams prior to the year, and Devonte Wyatt did not have a great rookie year, which should have been expected as a late first-round pick along the interior defensive line. The main reason we preach it taking guys a few years to develop in the trenches is because it usually does. Wyatt is no exception. Guys like Quentin Nelson on the offensive side of the ball and Aaron Donald on the defensive side of the ball, probable future Hall of Famers, probable in Quentin's case, 100% in Aaron Donald's case, they are the outliers and certainly not the standard. But Devonte had a really good second year and had 45 pressures on 305 pass rushing snaps, which is a very good rate for any player. Now, the one concern I have with the Packers defense is secondary, specifically corner outside of Jair Alexander. I think Jair and Xavier McKinney are two great players to have in the secondary, but I do have concerns with Eric Stokes, Keyshawn Nixon, Corey Ballantyne, and Carrington Valentine. Don't say those two names fast in a row, by the way, because it's very easy to get those two confused. The point is, the Packers' front four is going to have to get home early and often, because if Jair misses any games, which is almost to be expected in a league as physically demanding as the NFL is with a 17-game schedule, well, it could prove to be a long day for the Green Bay Packers. Now, with the 2024 Packers offense, I think the outlook has to be optimistic for a few reasons. We obviously saw how poor they were at times early in the 2023 season, and that was expected to carry out not just for the first 9 games, but for the entirety of seasons. And I think some teams are, especially with young quarterbacks, they're inevitably going to be compared to the 2023 Packers if, in fact, they struggle. But what the Packers did last year was an outlier and definitely not normal in the sense of how they really flipped their season. Now, between the time Marcus and I recorded the Packers preview, Jordan Love signed a contract extension, a $220 million contract extension. There were a lot of opinions on this. Some people thought it was idiotic to pay a guy based on 8 or 9 good games, and then of course the Dallas game, and some people's lasting memory at this point is the interception against the 49ers. However, I really liked the contract extension because the reality is you have to pay quarterbacks in today's era, whether it's Tua, whether it's Jordan Love, whether it's Pat Mahomes, whoever it is. If you have a quarterback that is slightly above average, he's going to get money. So that may be a hot take, but I was completely fine with the Packers paying Jordan Love because this team has a plethora of weapons. And whether you know this or not, the Packers actually had 6 receivers last year have 350 or more receiving yards, and that's going to continue in 2024. And in fact, from a fantasy standpoint, I really think they're going to be an incredibly frustrating team, whether it's Jaden Reed, Romeo Doubs, Dontavian Wicks, Christian Watson, or of course the tight ends in Tucker Kraft and Luke Musgrave. This offense is probably going to finish top 10 or 12 in points per game, and this is also coming off of a year, again, in which they struggled in a big way throughout not just maybe 1 or 2 games, but for 50% of a season. So I don't know how you can't be anything but optimistic for the Packers offense heading into 2024. From a stat projection standpoint, admittedly that's going to be tough, and we also break this down with Marcus, but I don't know if the Packers are going to have a 12 or 1300 yard receiver, much less a guy finished in the top 5 and be a 14 or 1500 yard receiver. I personally doubt that, but the Packers had 2 players have 8 receiving touchdowns last year, none with double digits, which is completely fine, and I would expect that again moving forward because of how the ball distribution is going to be. There's probably going to be a game or two where Christian Watson has 147 yards and 2 touchdowns, and then he may have in the next 5 games a combined 147 yards and 2 touchdowns. Maybe not that drastic, but you get the point. The Packers are going to be able to spread the ball around in a big way, and with how Jordan Love commanded the offense down the stretch last year, and the fact that they are getting an upgrade at running back in Josh Jacobs, the sky is the limit for this team. Now, the expectations, I think, are going to be a little unfair for Jordan, as I think there's going to be people that say, well, he signed the $220 million extension. He needs to throw for 35, 37 touchdowns, however many every single year. And I think there's also going to be a crowd where whatever he does is never going to be enough from a stat sheet or from that standpoint. But I really like this offense. I think they are going to be one of the most efficient and ultimately one of the best offenses entering the 24 season. And even if they struggle at the beginning of the year, I think like we saw last year when they weather the storm and they go through their fair share of adversity, that by the time the season comes to an end, the Packers are going to be ready to play when it matters most. So the 2024 Packers offense going to be a great unit. I don't think they're going to have like I said, not many, that's not the right word. I don't think they're going to have more than one 1,000-yard receiver, and we break this down more with Marcus. So without further ado, let's go ahead and dive into the interview with Marcus Whitman, a fellow Green Bay Packers fan. All right, for the Packers team preview, we welcome on big Packers fan Marcus Whitman, that franchise guy. Marcus, how we doing?
Doing great. Thank you so much for having me. It's always fun talking Packers with, Vikings fans, Bears fans, one of the best rivalries out there. So happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hey, we split last year, and we'll see what happens this year, but we're just going to go ahead and dive right in. So obviously you guys had a phenomenal end to the year last year, and obviously with the final 8-game stretch that Jordan had, plus the 2 postseason games, I would imagine he's most Packers fans' player that they're looking forward to watching this year. But outside of him, who are you most looking forward to seeing in 2024?
So for me, it is a very easy answer. It is, and it's 2 players. It's both Rashawn Gary and Lucas Van Ness. So as a Packers fan, I have been screaming and crying to switch to more of a kind of, 4-2 style front where the edge rushers are putting their hand in the dirt. maybe simplify the defense a little bit more up front and just let guys pin their ears back and play fast. And for me, both Gary and Lucas Van Ness were playing sort of out of scheme as a stand-up edge. And I think a lot of times we can overrate that conversation of, is a guy a 3-4 outside backer or a 4-3 DN, that kind of thing. I think a lot of times that can get overstated. But when you're talking about a pair of guys that are 270 plus pounds that in college did put their hand in the dirt, and I think at that weight, you're much better just pinning your ears back, flying off the ball from a 3-point stance, as opposed to the more like lighter on your feet, undersized edge. And finally, we're going to get a defensive coordinator that I think is going to let these two guys do that. And the funny thing is, a lot of coordinators will look at guys like, maybe a good example is like a Joey Bosa in LA, and be like, yeah, we're a 3-4 system, but we'll let him put his hand in the dirt. Well, we had a guy named Joe Barry calling plays for the defense for the last 3 years, and he was as bad at putting players in a position to succeed as I've ever seen a defensive coordinator. So I'm just really stoked to see Gary, a full year recovered from the ACL, getting to play, a lot more upfield as a penetrator, as a power rusher. And Lucas Van Ness, who I feel like people have just quickly forgotten about, when the Packers drafted for him was what they did with Rashawn Gary, where he was, going to be coming off the bench and more of a developmental piece. He's now heading into year 2. So for me, it's easily those guys. I do have one other name on here, and it's actually Josh Jacobs, because I've always been a big Josh Jacobs guy. I thought he was underrated in that draft. I thought he was underrated up until the point where the Raiders declined his 5th-year option, and everyone was freaking out about that. And I was like, this guy's still really freaking good. So didn't have the best year last year, but I think he can get a little bit healthier and be even better than like what Aaron Jones was for the Packers, just being a healthy 3-down back with even a little bit more power. So I'm really excited to see him in a Packers jersey.
So off of the Lucas Van Ness, off that comment, Lucas will actually be my breakout player. I like what you said specifically regarding the addition by subtraction with the departure of former defensive coordinator Joe Barry, and I think that Gary and Lucas are going to be a very, very solid duo this year to get after the quarterback. So with Lucas being my breakout player for Green Bay this year, who is a guy that you think really takes the next step? Because there's a lot of players that could be in contention for this.
I'm going to go with Eric Stokes. If I'm not picking Lucas Van Ness, and I'm not the biggest Eric Stokes guy, I'll get that out of the way, but I did definitely think, and this goes right back to like the scheme fit, but when the Packers drafted him, I was like, why would they take him? He's like a bump and run man corner, and they're like a full zone team. Well, now they want to, as far as the secondary is concerned, play a lot more press coverage, a lot more man coverage, kind of try to replicate, some of these, I think like they see what Cleveland did last year and what Dallas has been doing, what San Francisco does. I think Stokes in that type of defense has a lot more promise when he's actually on the field. And then the other side of this is health. I don't remember at all him being some crazy injury prone player. I think he's just been a guy that's had really bad injury luck. They obviously spent a 1st-round pick on him. And if you look at what they did this offseason, one thing they completely ignored was cornerback. So they seem pretty confident that these injuries are going to be behind him, that he's a talented player, and the scheme is a good fit for him now. So he would be my pick to kind of take a leap for the team.
So I'm also glad within the Stokes answer, because this kind of brings up a concern that I think is fair with the 2024 Packers. I mean, the roster is really complete, and they've done a really tremendous job of building back the roster over the past couple of years while still obviously being competitive. But like you mentioned, they didn't really address corner this offseason. So what is your biggest concern for the Packers if they lose in the playoffs, or if they fail to reach the Super Bowl?
I do think that's going to be the thing you're worried about, especially on defense. Like if I put a panic meter on it, it's like a 4 out of 10, mainly because I think with the pass rush up front, I'm a big believer that a great pass rush can definitely shield a secondary. from many weaknesses, not all of their weaknesses. But I do think the combination of the pass rush being better and the defensive coordinator just by not being Joe Barry, I think is going to be a massive upgrade. I think even if you get sort of a worst case scenario for the secondary, you're still going to have a pretty above average defense, in my opinion. Now, if you get that worst case scenario, that would be Stokes is hurt come January, just as he's been. So he's not out there. And then you do have a little bit of insurance in there and someone they like and someone I was really high on in Carrington Valentine, who had no business falling to the 7th round in last year's draft. You know, we always see this run of young, athletic, lengthy SEC corners every year. It's like 4th, 5th round. These guys just fly off the board. He should have been in that territory. And he exceeded, like even if he had been drafted 4th, 5th round, he exceeded rookie expectations had he been drafted there. So he's got the traits. He's just needs to keep continuing to clean up his technique and his anticipation back there. I still think he can be at worst a solid, option out there if Stokes is hurt. And then you're going to have some issues in the slot. Ideally, you could have all 3 corners healthy and Jair Alexander can be in the slot. I think a lot of those like big 3rd downs. But if you're not able to get all 3 of those out there, you're going to be looking at a guy like Keyshawn Nixon that teams can pick on in those kind of 3rd and 6th situations and just kind of have whatever they want, short to intermediate. So it's a roundabout way of saying I'm not too worried about it, but certainly when you're talking about if they get to the NFC Championship and you need, those big 3rd down stops and you have to deal with Debo and potentially Ayuk for the Niners and Kittle has given the Packers fits, you would certainly be worried about that matchup if things don't go well for the secondary. And against Detroit, that might even be more so with Amon-Ra St. Brown in the slot and what we saw from Laporta last year. So in the teams that they're going to have to beat, that slot corner spot especially would probably be your concern. So the dream again is Stokes and Valentine on the outside with Jair in the slot for big 3rd downs.
So I'm glad that this actually, you're doing a great job, Marcus. This just segues me into my next question just seamlessly. I was going to ask, off of the 49ers and Lions comment, because if Green Bay is to make a deep postseason run this year, which is absolutely possible, it's almost inevitable that they're going to have to go through either Detroit or San Francisco or even both. So who would you say is their biggest threat in the NFC? Because there is a possibility they play Detroit 3 times this year.
Yeah. Well, I certainly had to eat a lot of crow on where I was at with the Lions heading into last year, which was unfortunate because I've been so high on them in the Dan Campbell era. But, anytime I say anything that's not super pro Detroit, people think I'm a big hater. I will say the Niners is still the biggest threat. And there's a little bit of a twisted take there. This might be the hottest take I have here. I think Green Bay is better as a road playoff team. I just do. They always have been. Lambeau, for as legendary as it is, and I'm sorry, Packers fans, is one of the most overrated home field advantages in sports. Packers have never been that badass, play in the cold weather, beat you in the face type of team. They are so much better with a chip on their shoulder, getting to go to Dallas in a dome. I would much rather they go to Detroit than Detroit goes to Green Bay, because that's what Detroit is, right? They want it to be negative 20 degrees and to punch them in the face. I would be more worried playing Detroit in Lambeau in the cold than I would be getting to play them in a dome, despite the crowd noise. So for a roundabout reason, I think it's almost a best case scenario that Detroit wins the division and the Packers are a 11, 12 win wild card team. And I know that's a little crazy to say that, but and obviously Detroit holds the cards there because they're in the division, and that's why you don't go with the Niners. But both teams, I think, present a lot of big problems. We kind of talked about the physicality aspect. I think both the Niners and Detroit have given Green Bay fits in that regard. And just the Niners have this unbelievable good juju or karma or whatever you want to call it. Packers just can't get past them. And until Green Bay shows they can beat San Francisco, they will always be the team that I answer in that type of question.
I thought that was an incredible point with the Lambeau part, not the whole the home field, but like the fact that Detroit is you said it, they're much better, they're much more fit to play outside. And I never really thought about it in that sense of where Montgomery and Gibbs would just be, they would feast in a situation like that. And then of course Panay and everybody would get going.
Mm-hmm.
That makes, that is a fantastic point. Now, one thing that we discuss with my team previews is the rookie impact. And I wanted to ask which rookie you are most looking forward to watching this year, and why. Is it somebody like Marshawn Lloyd, who would be the RB2, or even Jordan Morgan? Or I'm eager to see where you stand on this.
I'm going to go with Edgerrin Cooper, the linebacker. Okay. I think it's going to be a lot of fun. I think the way they're going to use him is say, you're a rookie linebacker. We're going to really hope Quay takes that next step up with Campbell leaving in terms of gap discipline and doing all the tough linebacker stuff. And then hopefully with a new system that I think is going to blitz these guys a lot. Excited to see Quay in that type of system too. But Cooper was just an athlete at Texas A&M, and that's how they used him. A lot of third down blitzing, and this is most college linebackers, but just, don't worry too much about the read keys. We want you to get better as time goes on, but just, fly around, make plays. And I think he's going to be he's going to be a highlight reel waiting to happen for Green Bay. So I'm excited to watch him. I think the end product will lead to some mixed results. The Marshawn Lloyd thing, I'm excited. Like, he's going to make some fun plays, but I just don't have huge expectations for him. He reminded me of like a college version of DeAndre Swift, where a lot of really exciting plays out there, but every other play he's bouncing a run outside, leaving meat on the bones of certain runs. So I could see myself being just as much frustrated with Marshawn Lloyd as I am excited about it. But he's a playmaker. I think a lot of fans are going to be excited to see him as well. I do want to mention Jordan Morgan real quick. He's not going to be the most flashy, exciting player to watch, which is why I didn't go with him for this answer. But I think he's going to be a really useful piece for the Packers. And they're kind of sorting through that offensive line to see what their best five is going to be. And him being able to play guard or tackle, I think, is going to be a big part of finding that answer. So I am excited for him. It's just, offensive line's not quite as flashy as linebacker or running back.
So I'm going to kind of put you on the spot here with this, just because I feel like Jordan Morgan, when the pick was made, it was very like, this is a Packers selection in a good way. But when the pick was coming up, did you think that Terrion Arnold was going to fall right into your guys' laps? And then Detroit, obviously, like, did you think that was going to happen, or what was your thought process?
Terrion, I figured would be around there. The guy I was a little surprised was Cooper DeJean that they passed on. Again, Lions fans are going to be mad at me, but I was, Terrion was a solid corner prospect in my opinion. I thought he was a little overhyped. It's just, there's not a great track record of first round corners that run 4.5. So he went around the range I thought he would. But I definitely thought Cooper would have been off the board for Green Bay. We talked about the issue in slot corner, but they clearly believe in that group. The other guy I really wanted was Barton, who won a pick later to Tampa. And I'm worried he's going to go be an all-pro center for them. But when you break down them wanting more like tackle flexibility, I think the pick did make sense to go with Morgan over Barton.
Okay, so now transitioning to another position that's incredibly young in the offense. And this is the title of this team preview is going to be The Green Bay Packers Are Dangerous. And it of course relates to Jordan Love having the end of the season that he had, but it also relates to how young the receiving core is. So I guess the question here would be to kind of like, what ranking, I guess, would you go for how excited you are for the top 3 or 4 receivers the Packers have this year? Because there is a plethora of weapons for Jordan Love to throw to.
I think it all kind of rotates around Jaden Reed. I'm just kind of explaining how it breaks down in my mind. Reed's got his role locked in. He's going to be the slot manufactured touch guy, crossing routes, give him handoffs. He's dead set in that role. So he's going to be a very solid 2 in terms of production. I'm expecting 900 yards, 65 catches, probably 5 touchdowns. I think he's very solid in what he showed as a rookie. And then for me, the big question is going to be, can Christian Watson stay healthy? I think they very much are still counting on and hoping that he can be the explosive option for the offense. It's very fascinating when you look into kind of how they've gone about trying to make sure he can stay healthy. He had and I'm not a doctor, but he had a muscle mass discrepancy in his legs.
I saw that. Yeah.
So, and this was the same thing. I think it was Alvin Kamara had the same adjustment, and he was able to stay healthier after that, even at his age. So there's reason to believe that this is a real thing, and that if, I think it was up to like 18%, like one leg was more muscle than the other. So when you're overcompensating like that, it makes total sense to me why you're pulling your hamstring, because you're overworking one side to keep up with the other. And that was right at home. Madison, Wisconsin is like the hamstring like place to go in the country, apparently. So plenty of reason to believe that, and they've apparently successfully bridged that gap to be much closer as well. But plenty of reason to believe he can stay healthy, and he just brings something that you don't have with the other guys, and that's that vertical threat. It's a Shanahan inspired offense. They want those play action shot plays. And when he's been healthy, he's been frankly way better than I even expected he would be in terms of winning tough catches. He has been inconsistent and streaky, really. He'll have like 5 weeks where he plays soft and he reminds you of MVS, where you like can't come down with tough catches. And then all of a sudden he just flips a switch and he's like mossing dudes out there. So you really want to see him continue to have that tough mentality down the field, because there's no doubt he can get open and be a threat after the catch. So if he's healthy, he is the most dynamic, closest thing to a number one piece that Green Bay has. And then to me, Romeo Doubs and Dontavion Wicks are kind of in that route runner, capable starter cluster for me. I like both players, frankly. If Watson's hurt, I think they'll both start and play pretty well. People forget that Doubs was the guy in the playoffs that was the absolute monster for them. I think he had like 200 yards, went off in that Cowboys game. So he's coming off, his best couple of games at the end of the last year. So I have total faith in those guys. But if Watson's hurt, I think they're going to be lacking a little bit of dynamism in the offense.
So it's crazy how the Packers offense went from they obviously were never bad, but it's just, I feel like they went from not the best, we'll say maybe average, to maybe slightly below average in terms of weapons, to now where they have all of these guys that are 25 or younger. How excited are you for both of the tight ends this year in Luke Musgrave and Tucker Kraft?
Yeah, I just love how their roles play next to each other. LaFleur does want to be able to get out in 12 personnel, and they just make such sense together. Kraft is just a tough, balanced tight end. He can be the inline guy, do a lot more of the dirty work. He's a guy that defenses kind of forget about underneath, and then he'll hurt you after the catch. So I really like what he is in that role. And then, Musgrave, I'm excited for, but he's the guy that I think has more to prove, frankly, just because he's got more upside and isn't the blocker that Kraft is. So there's reason to be excited about him. It's just, for the last couple of years, there's been a little, going back to the final year at Oregon State where he couldn't stay on the field, just been a little bit of something missing with him. But he's definitely a wild card, but they don't necessarily need him either, which is a good place to be.
Okay, so now I have a couple rapid fire questions for you, and then we'll ask where you think the Packers team ceiling is. So
Sure.
the first over under, he threw for 32 touchdowns last year. So we're going to set the line half more, 32 and a half touchdowns, passing touchdowns for Jordan Love this year.
That's a lot. That's a lot of touchdowns.
It is.
I'm a huge Jordan Love guy. I'm gonna back him and say over, but I don't think it's gonna shatter it. I think it'll be 33, 34. Just to say a little bit on Love, like, there is big of a Love guy as I am, there is still a creeping doubt that we get something in between first half Jordan Love and second half Jordan Love. I think it's natural to say, okay, it was a young offense. It was his first year as a starter. This is just who he is now, and he's heading in that direction. But football's a weird game, man. It is. Development's not always linear like that. He could take a step back this year and then leap forward the year after that. So it It's really tough. It's certainly not a line I would bet on. I would just hope for the over and enjoy watching it.
So for everyone watching this, we are recording Friday, July 26th. I'm not going to ask Marcus any questions about the Jordan Love contract because there's a possibility something is figured out between now and when the video would be released. So if you are wondering, that's not going to be asked. But my next question is, it's an easy one. He has 0 career receiving touchdowns. So Josh Jacobs over under half a receiving touchdown.
I'm 100% going over on this one. I think that he's going to, and this is only speculation, but I think they looked at Josh Jacobs as someone that can be a more reliable 3-down presence for them. Because Aaron Jones, I don't think they trusted to have the power in certain runs that they wanted to run. Hence the A.J. Dillon selection way back when. But also from a durability standpoint, they wanted to get him off the field and limit his touches so he could be there when they needed him most. I don't think they're worried about that with Josh Jacobs. I think that's why they made that change. I think he's going to be one of the bigger workhorse backs in the league. And Jordan Love is good at hitting his dump downs. LaFleur is good at, dialing up screens and stuff. I think he's going to have 55, 60 receptions. And I think there's a very likely chance he's at least falls into the end zone by accident. If not, has 5 or 6 touchdowns this year. So I would absolutely take that bet over.
I would too. I think it's actually insane. He's only like 5 receptions away from the record, by the way. It's like he's like 197 and the record's like 202 without a receiving touchdown.
Wow.
The next one is, I think it's a kind of difficult one. Over under 1.5 1,000-yard receivers for the 2024 Packers.
It was 1,000 yards or 1,050?
1,000.
Okay.
I know what I put in the DM, and I apologize. I just made this one up on the fly, but yeah.
I am going to go under because of the split. I think if Watson stays healthy, he can be the one that would be most likely to go over. And that might not be the most popular spin on it, but I think if you said over under 4 receivers over 800, I might say over because I think they really like all these guys. Love has talked about how it's kind of an underrated advantage that they have, that they don't have a number one because nobody knows where the ball is going. And he has shown that he is more than willing to just read out the defense and execute the play and just go to the best option on any individual play. So I don't know that they get multiple 1,000-yard receivers, but I think assuming Watson's healthy, all 4 of those guys are going to have good years.
And I think, especially from a fantasy perspective, and I would think you'd agree with this, but they're going to be outside of Love and Josh Jacobs. I think they're going to be an incredibly frustrating team to project on a week-to-week basis. But the next one is, what is the 2024 Packers team ceiling? How far can they go? I personally have them at an NFC Championship game loss. Curious to hear where you have them.
I'm sorry. I had a thought on the fantasy question. I was just going to say the 2 guys I would draft was Reed because the weekly floor I think is going to be really high, and then Watson because I think the upside. And I was thinking about that in my mind and completely tuned out your question.
I got you. No. So anyway, the team I completely agree with what you're saying, though. I think if there is one player to draft fantasy wise, I completely agree that I think it would be Jaden. But the question is we end every video with the team's team ceiling. My personal team ceiling for the 2024 Packers is the NFC Championship game. And I'm eager to see where you have the 2024 Packers team ceiling.
I would go a step further than that. I think their ceiling is to win the Super Bowl. And I think everyone in that building believes that. I mean, they are the youngest team in the league, but they showed incredible upside last year. I mean, they showed their youth when they kind of choked against the Niners. I'm not going to lie. You're definitely hoping that interception at the end of the game from Love is something that doesn't become a trend for him, and he just kind of learns not to play hero ball in those moments. But no, I think with the strides that I'm expecting from this defense, I think that's going to be probably the biggest difference on this team. Even if the offense takes a little bit of a step back from what they were at the end of last year, I really think this could be a top 10 defense in the league quite easily with the amount of talent they have and just a good, well-schemed unit. So I definitely think if they ride the high end of variance, they're a Super Bowl team.
All right. Well, I appreciate you joining, Marcus, and good luck this year. And one last question. Do you own a cheesehead? Like, do you own an actual one do you own an actual block of cheddar?
I just moved to Charlotte. I left the cheesehead at my parents, but I do own it. It's just not currently in my possession.
I got you. Well, I appreciate you joining, and thanks for coming by.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
That will wrap up the Packers preview. I hope you enjoyed, and if you did, please like and subscribe, as only about 40% of people watching are subscribed, as well as check out the Football Analysis podcast, and the link is in the description. Until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.